Faculty Scholar, and presentation of the Herbert Cheever Jr. Liberal Arts Lecture. For those who don't know me, I am Lynn Sargent, Dean of the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences. And I have to go off script a little bit because last year, exactly 1 year ago, I was interviewing for this position at South Dakota State University, so it is my very genuine honor to be here tonight as the Dean of the College. Tonight's award and lecture are named in honor of two former professors and administrators in our college. Professor John Hendrickson joined the faculty in 1957. He became head of the Department of Political Science in 1967 and led the department until his retirement in 1988. Herbert Cheever Jr. served as professor in political science from 1968 until his retirement 32 years later in 2000. He also served as department head for 9 of those years and as acting dean of the College of Arts and Sciences in 1985 and 1986, and 1991 and 1992, and dean from 1992 to 2000. To begin our program, I would like to introduce a few special guests in the audience. Please stand as I call your name. From the J.P. Hendrickson family, Susie Hendrickson. Becky Hendrickson. From the Herbert Cheever family and friends, Sidna Cheever. Lynn and Diane Redzel. Margaret Denton. Bob and Donna Burns. Ken and Mary Howe. And Pat Rieger. We are also pleased to have 3 of the 4 students who are receiving the prestigious Hendrickson Scholarship in Political Science and Honors with us tonight. Please help me congratulate Emily Toms, Timothy Morgan, and our most recent scholar, Cole Peterson. We're recognizing them for the exceptional academic achievement they have exhibited and wish them well in their studies. Please consult your program to find biographies of all of our honorees, Dr. J.B. Hendrickson and Dean Herbert Cheever, and also George Tsakiridis, who will deliver our lecture tonight. This lecture was created to elevate our understanding of and appreciation for the value of a liberal education. One reason why the liberal arts are so enriching is that they allow us to join a conversation that has been in progress literally for thousands of years. We have the opportunity to engage with some of history's greatest thinkers. We can learn from them, draw inspiration from them, and even wrestle fiercely with some of them. Regardless, we grow as people by listening to and responding to the voices from the past. We become better versions of ourselves by participating in the conversation. We live in a society that tends to glamorize what is new and fashionable, while often disregarding what we see as old, stodgy, or outdated. Honestly, I'm probably guilty of that myself. But a solid foundation in the liberal arts teaches us that wisdom and an understanding of the human experience has no expiration date. Neither Sophocles, nor Shakespeare, nor Cervantes ever imagined the technology that we enjoy today, but their timeless insights remain as relevant as ever. This lecture series serves as an annual celebration of how the liberal arts continue to inform our society. For the students in the audience, I want you to know that my faculty colleagues and I are committed to your success. Our goal for the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences is that every one of you will receive a rigorous and rewarding education. An education that allows you to follow your passions, engage in discovery and creativity, and that prepares you to choose professional and personal opportunities that will enrich your lives and the lives of others. I also want you to reflect on the conversation that you have joined. Your education doesn't end when you cross the stage in Frost Arena and shake President Dunn's hand. The conversation continues and should keep participating through your entire life. I'm proud to work alongside colleagues like Dr. Tsakiridis, who follow in the footsteps of Dr. Cheever and Dr. Hendrickson, who model lifelong learning and a lifetime commitment to truth and humane values. I hope you do the same. And now, to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Tsakiridis, we will have Dr. Christy Garsantos.
Okay, so little glitch. That's okay. Good evening. My name is Christy Garsantos, and I serve as the inaugural director of the School of American and Global Studies. And before I go on to introduce Dr. Tsakiridis this evening, I do want to mention that we have a special plaque posted in the lobby of the main office of the college. This plaque recognizes the Hendrickson Scholar, and there is a new name added each year. So, without further ado, I want to tell you a little bit about the School of American and Global Studies. With programs in American Indian Studies, Global Studies, History, Legal Studies, Modern Languages, Philosophy, Political Science, and Religion, roughly 60% of all liberal arts students at South Dakota State University call the School of American and Global Studies home. Proudly, we are also home to 4 of the 7 J.P. Hendrickson Liberal Arts Faculty Scholars. The School of American and Global Studies deeply values the liberal arts as the intellectual and cultural core of a university education. Our mission is to prepare critical thinkers and proficient researchers who are culturally literate and globally engaged. Our faculty teach, conduct research, and disseminate scholarship on the cultural, historical, linguistic, philosophical, political, and religious systems that sustain U.S. and global societies. And, as you will experience here this evening, our award-winning faculty frequently share this knowledge through their service and outreach to benefit South Dakota, the nation, and the world. I am honored to introduce one of our award-winning faculty, this year's J.P. Hendrickson Liberal Arts Faculty Scholar, and this evening's Herbert Cheever Jr. Liberal Arts Lecture Speaker, Dr. George Tsakiridis. Dr. George, as he is affectionately called by his students, is an exemplary liberal arts teacher and scholar who has focused on interdisciplinary research his entire career. This interdisciplinary focus even informs his off-campus pursuits. In his free time, Dr. Tsakiridis is an actor and filmmaker and a huge fan of the TV series, The Americans. In fact, he is currently writing a book for the Theology and Pop Culture series titled Theology and the Americans. Starting with a degree in electrical engineering, George has used that scientific background to inform his work in religion and philosophy. With an early focus on meditation and cognitive science, he has covered a breadth of topics, recently publishing on forgiveness and the science of emotion. With his teaching moving toward a focus on ethics and tech ethics, George has taught the ethics of big data to computer science students at SDSU, using his technical background to help students find the professional applications of philosophy and ethics. He covers topics such as internet privacy, social network identity, and intellectual property issues. His work in the SDSU Ethics Lab has continued this emphasis on technology with an upcoming project focusing on evangelicals, populism, and technology. His talk tonight will spark a conversation that everyone should have, both professionally and personally, as technology has changed the very way we live and interact. Please join me in welcoming Dr. George Tsakiridis to the stage. Congratulations on being named this year's J.P. Hendrickson Scholar. Thank you. And before I scoot off the stage, I do also want to mention that we also have Chuck Hendrickson with us this evening. He was able to join us as well.
Okay. How's everybody doing? Okay. Girls, if a guy remembers your birthday, knows what you enjoy, saves your pictures, understands your family and friends, this guy is not your man. This guy is Mark Zuckerberg. Okay, so this is a Facebook meme that actually appeared, I think, the morning I was writing up the proposal for this lecture. And why do we even have a meme like this, and why do we laugh at it? Well, I think we take for granted that our information is out there on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, and we don't worry about it. That's a trade we're willing to make. We don't care if we lose our privacy as long as we connect with other people, whatever that means. We'll talk about that in a second. So the year is 2016, and that was a big year in American culture. And not for the reasons you might be thinking, but because in February of 2016, the FBI was dealing with a problem. And they found this phone that a terrorist had left behind. Because like all of us, terrorists forget their phones too. And what happened is they were trying to get the information off this phone, and they couldn't figure it out. They had 10 chances to crack it, and if they didn't crack it, they were going to have the phone wiped. It would automatically wipe. That's how these things work. And so they went to Apple Computer, and they said, can you create a workaround so that we can fix this and we can access this data? And on February 16th, and I remember that date because that's my anniversary, Tim Cook wrote an open letter to the customers of Apple, but also to the FBI, I think, too. And what he said was this. This is just a portion of it, but the implications of the government's demands are chilling. If the government can use the All Writs Act to make it easier to unlock your iPhone, it would have the power to reach into anyone's device to capture their data. The government could extend this breach of privacy and demand that Apple build surveillance software to intercept your messages, access your health records or financial data, track your location, or even access your phone's microphone or camera without your knowledge. Now, even as he wrote this, I think we probably already knew that there were entities that could do this, such as Facebook. We always blame Facebook. They're an easy target. What ended up happening is he drew a line in the sand, he said no. And the FBI backed down. Briefly, let me just say the All Writs Act is a 200-plus-year-old act that is kind of a catch-all for legal cases like this. So, like all technology, the law doesn't keep up with it. Technology is always ahead of the law. And so we're dealing with like wiretap laws from the 70s that we apply to modern smartphones, and we have the same issue. Anyway, long story short, the FBI somehow actually ended up getting into the phone on their own. So whether they needed to ask Apple in the first place, well, that's a good question. But the workaround that would have been created would have been allowed the FBI and others to hack into any iPhone. So any iPhone user would have their data compromised. So it raises this large question for us as we deal with technology in the 21st century. Does the security of the many outweigh the privacy of the few? I mean, many. Because we're not just dealing with a few people's privacy, we're dealing with everyone's privacy. So do security and privacy have to be in opposition? That's one of the major questions I ask when I'm looking at a tech ethics problem. And I think there are some different ways of looking at this. We look at professional ethics, like how should Facebook behave in the first place? But we also look at our personal ethics, and how do we approach social media? So, I've already gotten the okay on this, but I'm actually going to hop down off the stage, because I like to give these talks maybe TED style more. So if you'll forgive me, or maybe you like it, I'm going to walk around a little bit while I talk. We're going to start with data mining, and we're going to go through just kind of an overview of what kind of ways that Facebook and other entities are accessing your data or using your data. So data mining is the gleaning of user data through apps and online systems to create large databases, typically referred to as, quote, big data. And you've probably heard of big oil or big pharma. It's the same sort of thing. It's just this massive, these massive databases where entities collect your information and then can use it for whatever purposes they want. Those could be research purposes, could be something very good, we'll talk about that. Could be something very bad. So it's the reason you get targeted ads. So you search for a humidifier on Amazon, and then 2 seconds later you're getting an ad for a humidifier on Facebook. And you might be happy about that, because you now see a sale on humidifiers. So it could work to your benefit. But it also might creep you out, because now you know that what you did on one site is actually transferring to another. And that can be through various methods. So it's both beneficial and dangerous. And it allows research to move at an unprecedented rate because the amounts of data that are being accumulated right here in this room. So if you have your phones on, you're transmitting data. So those of you who aren't paying attention and looking at your phone, that's what you're doing. So where do we find data mining? This is just kind of a quick overview. Social networks, of course, Facebook and Google, although Google Plus kind of crashed and burned. Video surveillance, police cameras, facial recognition software. We'll talk about that a little bit. And then everyday databases that we might not think about, like medical databases, financial databases. And we'll talk briefly about attached and unattached markers. So when you have data that is collected, you might have an attached marker to it, meaning your name, your birthday, your location, your social security number, maybe something else, a medical condition. But there's a way for them to track that data back to you specifically, versus track it to a general population where it might be useful just for statistical purposes. So, how do they mine your data? Some of this is probably a review, but every time you sign up for a service, product, or network, you are accessing a data mining network. Lists sold through your credit cards. You know that big thing you get in the mail every once in a while that says update to credit card terms of service, and like no one looks at it, and then hopefully you recycle it if you're green-minded, or you shred it. That basically says how they use your data. They might sell your data to third parties. Quizzes on social networks, so every time you want to find out what Disney princess you are, your data's being mined. And you're probably happy about it anyway, because you found out you were Jasmine or Ariel, and you're so happy about it that you don't care that your data was mined, because you want to tell all your friends on Facebook that you're Ariel. Social network activity, just how everything you put into Facebook, Instagram, those pictures you put on Instagram are now part of data mining. Search engine entry, so every time you type into a search engine like Google, and of course Google is the most common, but we could say Bing or DuckDuckGo or some of the others, that's creating databases, cookies through your browser, etc. And you know that long terms of service agreement you click agree on every time? Because you're not going to read that. It's in legalese, it's going to take you forever. You just click yes, and you assume, because everybody else you know has clicked yes, it must be okay, right? Well, it might not be. And you might want to read that. Okay, so I want to talk about 3 cases really quick. Facebook, Google, and then Cambridge Analytica, which probably is on some of your minds. And how data mining has kind of caught the eye of news resources. Now, if you do a Google search right now, or Bing or DuckDuckGo, just to be fair, and you say Facebook data mining, you're going to find a lot of different articles pop up. And it's going to be all kinds of, there was a case where Facebook was scraping data off users' Android phones so they could get their email and contact lists off of that because you signed up for something else. So you're actually putting these companies into your phone in a broader way than you might know. And this isn't new, I'm sure a lot of you have already heard this. But I want to set something up here. Okay. There's an ethically sourced picture you can look at. All right, the Facebook mood experiment. This is 2012, so this is a while ago now. We're looking back a little ways. But the Facebook mood experiment, this was one of the first experiments that got on everyone's radar when they suddenly saw, wait a second, maybe Facebook is doing more to our news feed and to our personal messaging than we thought they were. They set up an emotional contagion experiment to see if users would be affected. So what they did was they tweaked the user feed. So some users got a happier feed or a sadder feed. They would take maybe keywords to put certain posts and not other posts. I think we take for granted now that they manipulate our feeds all the time. So even if you have 500 friends, you probably only see posts from 10 of them, 20 of them. But anyway, they wanted to see how would this affect people. Would people be happier if they saw happier content? Would they be sadder if they saw sadder content? And how would this play out? So what happened is, in conjunction with some researchers, they found out that that was true. At least it was statistically significant enough that the research was a success. Although if you actually look at the numbers, it wasn't huge. It wasn't like 50% happier if you saw happiness. It was a very small number. But the problem that came out of this is the ethical question. If Facebook can manipulate your feed and make you feel something different based on their choices, is that an ethical thing to do? It was a legal thing to do because of the aforementioned terms of service thing you checked off. You already agreed to it. Although, as many of you who are researchers know, there are certain guidelines in place when you do survey research and you need to make people aware of what you're doing, which was not the case here. So although it was legal, it may not have been ethical. So let's just bookmark that. So Facebook, we know Facebook is evil, right? I'm saying that tongue-in-cheek because this is recorded and Facebook probably is going to get old of it later. So. And I still want to use them. For all our hate toward Facebook, we use them. But what about Google? We love Google, right? Everyone uses Gmail. Google never causes any problems. They're solid. We have this good feeling when we talk about Google, right? Okay. Well, Google sells the future powered by your personal data. So if you went to NBC News last year, you would have seen this article, and it talks about how Google is not feeling the heat, even though Facebook is. And so one thing, they have a good marketing department, obviously. Their branding is much better than Facebook. And I, just on a personal note, I think part of it is because Mark Zuckerberg is the face of Facebook, and so he's an easy target. People hate Mark Zuckerberg, okay? For good or ill, they hate him. But Google does many of the same things. They have a massive data mining process that every time you do a search in their engine, they're creating databases. Everything you search for is being recorded somewhere. And we find out through Facebook and Google that even though when they say they aren't, they are. But we still use them. Why do we still use them? Then lastly, the Cambridge Analytica case. And this has drawn a lot of fire in recent years because, well, one, because it's in recent years, but two, because of Donald Trump. So the election in 2016, the Trump campaign hired out Cambridge Analytica to do research through Facebook, and they used Facebook to, let's say, data mining. And this was, as far as I know, legal. They used things in place, they used apps to get user data. It was legal. But many people would see it as unethical. Because people's data is being taken without their knowledge, and then it was used to potentially sway their vote. Now, is that different than what has happened in years past? It's just that we have a larger technological engine behind it. Is that our worry? Maybe. A lot of the problems we've had of the past thousands of years are now more visible because of technology. And I think we want to make sure we keep that in mind. But The point I want to make with this is that Cambridge Analytica is a case where Facebook may not be totally culpable for what happened, because they didn't overtly do it, maybe. But if they did, even if they were not culpable, is their security such or their platform such that it allows for this to happen? That's something we need to be aware of. Okay, so I'm going to just briefly talk about red light and speeding cameras. So we live in South Dakota, so we don't have to worry about this, right? To my knowledge, I don't think there are any red light cameras or speeding cameras in South Dakota. Please correct me in the Q&A if I'm wrong. I'm happy to be corrected and avoid those intersections. No, you shouldn't be running a red light anyway, okay, just for the record. But is it safety or money grab? So I'm from Chicago, and in Chicago they have these to some degree. And you could argue that putting the camera up to stop people from speeding because of fear of a ticket is a good thing. Typically it is also a money grab because you can raise a lot of revenue without having to station a cop there. But is it also a data grab? I think that's what we don't think about. There's a lot of data that's being accumulated by those cameras. Every time a picture is taken, it creates a location connection to that car, to potentially a person. And just as a side note, I'm not advocating for this, but there are ways of getting out of those tickets, partly because of the ethical question, because due process is under question there. Because they have to prove that you actually were driving that car, and they can't always do that. But there are some privacy questions, due process questions, and of course the data questions. And then lastly, facial recognition software and big data. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, and I could spend a lot of time on this, because this is sort of the next thing. And you've heard about deep fakes also, and people using facial images in other ways. But in popular culture, you see just some examples of this. So, does anyone watch British television here? You watch Luther or Sherlock or Line of Duty? Those are some of my favorites. What do the cops do as soon as they see a crime? They go to CCTV. We don't do that in America in the same way. So if you're in London, the way you do police work and the access to data is different also. Now, that data is being accumulated at a massive clip. And that's not just ones and zeros, it's not just your private bank accounts or your health records, which is scary enough, but it's actually your images, your location, and your movement. So if you've watched the TV show Person of Interest, that also is along these lines, that there's this supercomputer that can predict people's violent actions. And it's based on data it sucks from your phones and cameras. And it's fiction, but there's enough truth in it that we have fear of this. It's something we need to be aware of. Okay, so what about the medical and financial world? So medical databases are a great thing because you can centralize medical data, and now if you are across the country, they can access your medical records like nothing. They'll have your full file, they'll know that you're allergic to this or that, your medical history. It could save your life. But it also creates some security issues. One is ransomware. So there have been cases where a hacker locks up a hospital's medical system, will not allow the medical personnel to access it until they pay a ransom. The sad part is the ransoms are really pathetic too. It ended up being like a $5,000 ransom. That's like an overcharge on insurance anyway, right? Okay. So there's a security issue there, but the broader security issue is that you're centralizing huge amounts of data that are now accessible. So if someone is able to crack that system, they can get millions of user files in no time. Now the data is it's intensely secure. So it's not like you can just walk in and grab it. But if you know what you're doing, you have a gold mine waiting for you. So I kind of liken it to, say I have $100 and I hide that $100 in my basement. If you wanted that $100, you'd have to go find it, you'd have to know it was in my basement, you'd have to know that where my house was, you'd have to go into my house and get it. And it would be for $100. Not worth it, depending on who you are. What if, though, I went to a bank where there are thousands of $100 bills? It's going to be much harder to break into that bank, but there's also a lot of money there. So by centralizing data, what we're doing is we're creating caches of data that are now targets for hackers, ransomware, and actually foreign governments too. This becomes a military operation in some cases. Financial, it's the same thing. I don't want to go into it much, but you can imagine your social security number is tied to it, your financial records, everything about you that is necessary to steal your money and your identity. And less popularly, university records. So I won't say it on the video, but you probably figure it out. Like my alma mater actually got a letter a few years ago saying, you know what, your records were compromised. Oops, thanks. And now that's out there. Somebody got it, it's permanent. You can't put that genie back in the bottle. What do all these databases have in common? It's what I just mentioned. Social security number, name, birthday, location, etc., etc. Anything needed to steal your identity. Now, let's put it on a little more personal level. Like, what if, forgive me here, what if you have an STD? And now that information is public, and it's used against you in future hiring. Or what if you have cancer? And they're like, we're not going to hire this person because they are a health risk to our company. That kind of data, once it's out there, it's out there. So it creates some serious security breaches, even though there's a huge amount of convenience gained by it. Okay, so I've already kind of covered this, but despite the flaws, there's a lot of good here. The efficiency that we gain from financial records, from medical records being centralized is great. It saves a lot of lives. It makes it easy to transfer money, to move money, just personally. And social connections are much more easy. So after this, talk, all of you are going to come up here and be like, please make me your Facebook friend. And I'll be like, yeah, of course. And I'll friend you, even though I've never met you. And we might end up becoming friends through the network. And we might grow a friendship from that chance meeting at this night when you were here just for extra credit. That got too much of a laugh, but I expected it. Okay, let's be honest here. And attached versus unattached markers. This is the real ethical question. Is your data connected to you? Like if I know that you have a particular medical condition or a particular financial situation, that becomes a problem. So maybe I don't have a problem if Facebook gleans my data and just takes it and creates databases that are allowed for research so we can find, well, this cluster of people does this, and they have this medical issue, maybe that's related to a location. We can learn a lot from that. It can help people. We can use that research. But if it's tied to you specifically, it could be used against you specifically. This keeps showing up. Okay. So I want to move, that's data mining. That's kind of data mining in a nutshell. And there's so much more we could say. Informatics is the study of this. Take my course, Info 102, free advertising for me. Okay, but basically this is what we talk about. But I want to get more specifically, and this is the main part of the talk I want to focus on. It's social networks and the human person. So these are privacy issues that affect us. But what about personhood? Like, what are social networks doing to us personally? Okay, so I'm going to talk about a few philosophers, talk about some privacy issues, and then relationship. That's where I really want to focus. How does the internet and the social networks on the internet affect how we relate to one another? And what does that have to do with the humanities and the liberal arts, which is why we're here today, right? Okay. What does it mean to be human in a virtual world? Well, relationships and identity have changed. And we've been in this so long now that we probably take it for granted, but it has changed drastically. I want to take a little time and focus on clustering of social and interest groups. So this is both a great thing and a horrible thing. With the internet, we have access to basically anyone we want now. And I mean that in a good way. I can meet people all over the world of diverse interests and learn so much about things I never could have learned before. And that was the promise of the internet. So if, let's say, I'm a fan of, well, let's go with The Americans. It's already out, the cat's out of the bag, I'm not. So I'm a fan of the show The Americans. And that is actually somewhat of a niche show. It's very critically acclaimed, but not a ton of fans. And let's say nobody in Brookings likes The Americans. Please see me afterward if you do. We'll start a club. But say nobody likes it, I can find somebody across the globe, anywhere, who likes The Americans. We can talk about it. We can bid on the online prop and costume auction. We can just have all this fun because I've met this person that has an interest that I have that I never would have found just walking around my neighborhood. So that's a great thing, and I think all of us have experienced that maybe in one way or another if we use social networks. Now let's just turn it, we're going to use the kind of stereotypical example. What if my interest is genocide and racism? Well, I can do that exact same thing with that. I can find other people who hate people, and I can build clusters that way. And what has happened in the internet, in these social networks, is that we tend to cluster with people who are like us. We have access to anyone, but we tend to find people who are like us and become more insular. So even though we have a broader approach to life, we end up becoming more tightly wound. We're more connected than ever, we're more isolated than ever. How are both of these true? Well, there's a couple philosophers who I think give us a little insight into this. First, Albert Borgman. And you're wondering, this is not Albert Borgman. Okay. I made an effort to ethically source all of my pictures today. And there's no Albert Borgman free picture, so you got this one. But humans have a tendency toward what is easily consumed, if you didn't know that. We like what is easy. We don't like hard work. We don't like fighting for things. We like what is easy. Because of this, we are inclined toward the ease of social networks. We can get online, and even the friendships we have in real life, or the family relationships, we can kind of moderate them through social networks easily. Because we don't have to be present fully. But the social networks do not let us see others in full. We only get a piece of who they are. We're only seeing the updates they want to give us, the pictures they want to show us, and the messages they want to type to us. There's no resistance, though. So Borgman says in Crossing the Postmodern Divide, if everyone is indifferently present regardless of where one is located on the globe, no one is commandingly present. And what that means is all of us, I'm speaking generally here, are on social networks. We're all there. It's a big party. We're all together. And we can talk to anybody. But no one is fully present because we're there in a half-hearted way. We're only part of who we are. We don't want to show our full selves. We want to cultivate an image and protect our true self. Because a relationship takes risk. It takes commitment. And we're afraid of that, honestly. Which is what Herbert Cheever says. That the online social environment, there's not a full level of risk or commitment, and those are necessary for fully formed relationships. And he's drawing on Søren Kierkegaard, the 19th century philosopher. You don't have to know anything about Kierkegaard. And he's a tough read sometimes. But he's arguing that we are drawn to online social environments precisely because they allow us to play with the notions of identity, commitment, and meaning without taking the irrevocable consequences that ground real identities and relationships. In a social network, we can have friendships, and we can have lots of them, but we're not taking the risks and the commitments necessary to have fully formed relationships with fully formed people. So we never get the depth that the human soul craves because we're only taking the easy way out. We want the easy relationships. And so basically our relationships online become this sort of empty calories. Like we crave it. Like I crave potato chips, but I can't live on potato chips. We could test that. Challenge accepted. Okay, but it's empty calories. So if we don't get that full depth of relationship, what are we to do with that? We want to eat more, but we never get satisfied. So our identity in a virtual world allows us to be a less risky version of ourselves, which is a less fully formed version of ourselves. It leads to only being a piece of ourselves. We can also look at how this affects us too, not just how it affects relationships with others. We can think about that too. If love and relationships are the goal, then how can we be loved and accepted if it is not truly us who are being loved and accepted? And this is one of the questions, I think, of just human life, of philosophy, of religion, which are the areas I study. Philosophy and religion is really about what does it mean to be human? How are we connected to other people? That's what matters. How do we love others and how are we loved? That's what's really important. That's why the issues regarding tech ethics, it's not just about Facebook stole my data and it sucks. It's that my soul is being eaten away slowly because I'm not getting the full nourishment of relationships with other people. So we're going to quote the philosopher Malcolm in Jurassic Park, played by Jeff Goldblum. Their scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could. They didn't stop to think if they should. Yes. And so a former colleague of mine used to have a cartoon on his door, and it had two panes. And the first had a scientist creating a dinosaur, and it said, "Science tells us how to clone a dinosaur." And the second pane said, and it's got a guy being chased by a dinosaur, "The humanities tell us why this might not be a good idea." Okay? And that's where I'm going with this talk, if you haven't noticed. Technology changes rapidly, but the change is in some ways superficial. Now, we can dig into this a little deeper, and I understand that there's a lot of philosophy behind this, so don't get me wrong. But the question of what it means to be human is still the same question. We've asked that question for years, we keep asking it. The technology has changed, the way we approach the question changes, but the question still remains the same. And before we move on to the topic of ethics, I want to mention Jaron Lanier. He was one of the founders of virtual reality. He actually coined the term virtual reality. And he suggests that we did the internet wrong. That originally, when the internet was being founded, we wanted it to be free for everybody, so we could all access information, and we wouldn't have to pay for it. But what this led to was somebody has to make money on this. Somebody has to pay for it. And in order to do that, what they did was what? Third-party ads, right? So we have ads that pay for our freeness. Now, you can get an ad blocker. I highly recommend it. But it doesn't change the very nature and setting that the internet has developed into. And he says, "I don't think our species will survive unless we fix this," he concluded. "We cannot have a society where two people wish to communicate. When two people wish to communicate, the only way it can happen is if it's financed by a third person who wishes to manipulate them." And that's pretty pointed. That when I go on Facebook, and we're using Facebook as the target because they're an easy target, but you can choose anybody. When I go there, I am being manipulated in order to get the relationships and the love, so to speak, and I would say love, that I crave. In order to connect with others, to be affirmed, to affirm others, I am being manipulated. And what do I do with that? Because I'm kind of trapped in the system. And so can we reimagine an internet where this doesn't happen? He suggests yes, and he uses the example of Netflix. That Netflix has led to peak TV, as he calls it, and we've heard that term probably, that the best TV has come because we are willing to pay a little bit for it. And because everyone pays a little bit, it creates something really good. Now, I don't know if he's correct or not, but I think it's something we need to think about and step outside the box that we're in this tech circle here. Okay. So what does this have to do with the humanities? Well, it's ethics. It's in the title of the talk, so it's probably not a real big spoiler. Ethics tells us what to do and who to be. And this is, if you've had an ethics course, this is going to be reviewed for you, but I want to tie it to what we're talking about. So I think there's two main types of ethics that apply here. I apologize to all the utilitarians out there. We're going to let you go. Sorry if you're a utilitarian. And if you don't know what that means, take one of our ethics classes, okay? There's deontological ethics and virtue ethics I want to focus on. And deontological ethics is basically, deontology comes from the Greek word duty, to do your duty. So, there's Kant's categorical imperative, and then of course virtue ethics. Let me just go ahead and skip ahead here though. There's a nice little ethics graphic we can enjoy for 2 seconds. Okay. So as I said before, the questions are the same, the technology changes. So there's always a fear with new technology. People are afraid of what that means. And so sometimes we look at Facebook or something and we go, the apocalypse is here, it's all over, look at what people are doing. But often technology actually just points to the weaknesses that are already there in our society and who we are and how we relate. So through history, I've just given a few examples. And, the common read this year is on tech addiction. take part in an event where we actually worked with students to kind of make them aware of some of these historical developments. Invention. Suddenly, you could transmit information in a widespread way without having to copy it by hand. But the caveat is you'd have to read, and you'd have to know somebody who read, and that wasn't always a given, 600 years ago. Maybe it's not a given now, depending on where you are. What about the telephone? So I had a colleague a number of years back, and he would talk about the telephone, and he said, when the telephone came out, people were worried about what this meant for communication. Because before this time, you'd have to go to somebody's house and see them, or meet them in the marketplace, or whatever. You'd actually have to have a full connection. With the telephone, you would only hear their voice, and that's not what he focused on. What he focused on was, what if that person was calling you and they were naked? Right? Like that changes the dynamic of how we relate to each other. Now, I don't think most of you are thinking if somebody's naked when you're on the telephone. Please don't tell me if you are. But we take for granted that communication is more casual now. In fact, we expect people, like once the cell phone came out, you could be reached at any time, and we expected you to be reached at any time. If you call somebody and they don't pick up, you wonder why they're not picking up. Because you know the phone is on them. They have the phone. Maybe they're in a meeting. To the extent with the smartphone, we've got to a stage where if I want to call somebody, they may not want me to call them without texting them first. Has anyone had this experience? Like they're upset that you called them out of the blue. Well, 20 years ago, that was standard. And caller ID was a miracle, when that came about. You could actually know who was calling you. But technology has changed, and the way we relate through that has changed. And even though we don't think about, the telephone very much, and in fact, it's an afterthought with the iPhones and Android phones we have now, it did change the way we relate to one another. So, what I'm arguing here is something very simple, is that we treat people as fully formed humans. So we have to look at the systems that support the ethical treatment of others. So that is looking at a broad scale, saying how can we make Facebook or Google or some of these big tech giants more ethically minded, where our data is secure and we're getting the benefits. And we want behaviors that support respectful relationships and human flourishing. And I gotta say, philosophers love the word human flourishing, or that phrase. We can blame Aristotle, but that's the only time I hear it. Flourishing philosophers. Okay, that was a bad joke, I know, but come on, give me something. Okay, there, that's a pity laugh, thank you. Okay, so is Jeremy Lanier correct? Is he saying something? Can we really reimagine the internet? Can we find a more ethical path? That's like moving a very large piece of inertia there. Or do we have to find an ethical path within the current system? And what I want to just have as a takeaway from this today is that there are ethical systems like virtue ethics, like the categorical imperative, that can teach us how to live and be better to other people. The internet promotes freedom and an even playing field, yet it's the very tool that allows for a lack of privacy. So it has democratized information and access. You can do anything on the internet. So many entrepreneurs have popped up in the last 20 years due to the internet. It's amazing. But it also has become a tool of oppression. So just briefly, Kant's categorical imperative, act only on the maxim through which you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. And basically what he's saying is treat others as you would like to be treated. Now, if you're a philosopher in the audience and you want to argue that some more, save it for after the question and answer period. Please don't do that to me or anyone else in this room. But simply, it's really about making laws and ethical standards that we want to follow and we want others to follow. That we're all in agreement on that. So I think that's where we start. We're doing our duty to treat others well. We do what we should do. But I think what's more important is virtue ethics. And that asks the question, what should you be? It's about forming personal character. And if your personal character is formed strongly within the context of technology, technology will not affect you so much that you get sucked into this easy use and kind of weak relationship cycle because your character is strong enough to overcome that. But that's not easy. I mean, some virtues that I think are important here are kindness, honesty, diligence, and forgiveness. I mean, it sounds very simple, but working on yourself to make yourself a better person and a better citizen is hard work. And that's where this connects to the liberal arts and humanities. These subjects tell us who we should be, how we can understand life better, how we can understand humanity better. And if you don't understand humanity, it doesn't matter what technology is. Technology can keep changing, but if you don't know who you are and who others are, and you don't have those relationships, you're just eating those empty calories. You're not getting anything. So we have to have an appearance by Aristotle. Virtue being, as we have seen, of two kinds, intellectual and moral. Intellectual virtue is, for the most part, both produced and increased by instruction, and therefore requires experience and time. Whereas moral or ethical virtue is the product of habit, and has indeed derived its name with a slight variation of form from that word. So, I'm just going to use this chance again to plug the fact that we have a workshop on campus this week and a speaker tomorrow night on intellectual virtue at the Art Museum, Dr. Herbert Cheever. So that's timely. But really what I want to focus on for this talk is the fact that ethical virtue comes from habit. It's something you have to keep doing. It isn't just like, I know what to do, and so I'm okay. It's actually forming your character to do it. And the liberal arts, studying the humanities helps you better understand life. If you study history, you understand where we've been. If you understand philosophy, you understand those questions that we ask about ourselves. What I tell my students are, I'm not trying to change your mind on anything. I just want you to ask those questions so that when you come to the same conclusion or a different conclusion, you know why you believe that. It's not because I'm trying to manipulate you in some way. It's because I want you to understand why you think what you think. And when you do that, you become a better person because you're strong in your conviction. You aren't able to be moved by the waves of technology, by the waves of your peers. So ethics takes hard work. Ethical behavior in life or in virtual life must be a habit that we form and continue to form. Human nature is not always kind. That's probably the understatement of the century. People are not nice, but they can be. And I want to advocate that the liberal arts helps us be nice, helps us love one another, helps us be kind to each other, because we are better people through it. What I also want to say is, often we have a lecture like this and we talk about the humanities and the liberal arts and we go, rah, liberal arts, it's great, and I'm all for that, trust me. I have my undergraduate degrees in electrical engineering before I moved into the humanities. I do enjoy the humanities more, that's why I'm there. But both of those things are important. To understand scholarship, you need to understand everything. It isn't just about being a humanities scholar or about being a scientist. And when we start to pit those disciplines against each other, we all lose. We're losing something when we fight like that. And in today's world, there's a territorial thing going on between various disciplines. But I want us to understand scholarship as a broader whole. This is how it was understood in the ancient world. We had philosophy. Science was a part of philosophy. Science in its modern form is in the last, let's say 450 years. Which is great. I love science, don't get me wrong. But it was part of the whole. And I want us to see things as a whole. So I see ethics as the bridge which links us between technology and science and the humanities. And when we link those two things together because we understand how we should live and how we should be, that's pretty powerful. And we're not losing something by studying the liberal arts, we're gaining something. And we're not losing something by studying science, we're gaining something because we're more wholly formed humans. And we understand each other better. And this is really important, I think, just to be a good citizen and a human being. So just as a side note, I did ethically source all of these images. We have Mickey Mouse here because I can, because he became public domain last year, which was awesome, the original Mickey Mouse. But that raises another issue we're not going to talk about today, but I just wanted to do a little tease and say there are tech-related issues about intellectual property too. How we use intellectual property through social networks, that's a whole can of worms. And we'll just save that for a future lecture that you can all come to, for extra credit, of course. Okay. But let me just finish with this. There are two major points I want to make here, and that's technology creates the world we live in, but the humanities tell us who we are in that world. So you need both to live in this world. You need to understand how technology moves and changes, but you also have to understand who you are and who other humans are in that world. And I see ethics as the bridge by which we connect the STEM disciplines and the humanities. And one without the other is incomplete. So I really want to advocate for a fully formed university system and as well as fully formed humans. So that when you come to South Dakota State, you're getting a well-rounded education and understanding disciplines across the board. And you're not segregating yourself based on any number of factors, including intellectual discipline. Okay? And with that, I will open it up for questions.